Hello, welcome once again. So, in this class today, we'll be looking at the climatic belts of Nigeria as well as the vegetation of Nigeria. So, um, the specific objectives for this lesson will look at the climate of Nigeria, then we'll look at the temperature and rainfall pattern of Nigeria as well as the vegetation of Nigeria. So let's look at the meaning of climate. What is climate? Now, simply put it as this. Climate is the average weather condition of a place over a very long period of time, usually 35 years. Or you can say the average atmospheric condition of a place over a very long period of time, usually 35 years. Now, what this mean, what it means is that if you look at a place, for a particular year and you observe the condition of the atmosphere for that year, and then you continue observing it, the following year, every year you observe it, and you discover a specific pattern of, appearance or behavior of the atmosphere. Now, you can easily conclude that it is the climate of that place. Now, let's use Nigeria as an example. In Nigeria, we have the rainy season and the dry season. Now, if we have rainfall this year and the rainfall, spans for, let's say, 4 months, from possibly March till, June or July, and it happens the same way in the next year. It happens every year continuously to a period of about 35 years. Then we can now say that, oh, this is what the climate of that place. Now, for Nigeria, based on our latitude, which is 4 degrees and 14 degrees north of the equator, based on where we find ourselves in this latitude, we can say that Nigeria has a very hot tropical climate all through the year. We have series of rainfall in some places, but in general, the climate of Nigeria is usually hot because of our latitude. So, as you can see, this is a map of Nigeria, showing a little bit of our climate. But this time around, if you look at this map, it shares our climate in terms of rainfall. The elements, of climate include rainfall, includes cloud cover, humidity, temperature, and the rest. Now, when we look at this diagram, we can, use rainfall to understand our climates. Now, if you watch this diagram, if you look at the Sahel region of Nigeria, here in close to Lake Chad, we have it that the rainfall in Nigeria is usually, from 600 millimeter, downwards. Then as you progress to the Sudan savannah, where you have Sokoto, where you have, Katsina, where you have Kano, where you have Maiduguri, you will realize that the rainfall, is usually from 1,000 millimeter down to 600 millimeter. Then as you go into the Guinea savannah, which is the biggest vegetation we have in Nigeria, the rainfall usually spans from 1,500 millimeter down to 1,000 millimeter. And places here like Jos, Osun State, Ilorin, Makurdi, and the extreme north of the Enugu, with Yola, they all have what? They all have rainfalls, spanning in this amount. Then if you come down to the tropical rainforest of Nigeria, rainfall is usually between 2,000 millimeter down to 1,500 millimeter. Then for the tropical, the swamp, the freshwater swamp and the mangrove swamp, which is at the southern part of Nigeria, we have it that the rainfall is usually from 2,000 millimeter and above. So that's the part of Nigeria, where the climate experiences more of rainfall, compared to other parts of the country. Now, let's look at the seasons in Nigeria. Now, owing to the fact that we are found, close to the equator, as a result of that, we have a season different from, the seasons in the northern and the southern hemisphere. When you go to the, northern hemisphere, the European countries, you go to the American countries, you go to the southern American countries at the extreme south, and you also check the Asian continents. Now you realize that most countries there, they have 4 seasons, which is the winter, which is the summer, the autumn, and the spring. But for Nigeria and some countries in West Africa, that is not the case. Here in this part of the world, we actually have the rainy season and we have the dry season. So we have the rainy and dry season, or you can simply say the rainy season and the harmattan season, which we are going to look as we progress along. Now, let's start with the rainy season or the wet season. Now, this season usually starts in the mid part of March during the year, and it lasts till October. Though we have some places like the mangrove swamp and the freshwater swamp where the rainfall can even last beyond that period down to November, but usually from the mid-March to October. And if you go to the southern part of the northern part of Nigeria, rainfall is usually less. Their wet season is usually less compared to the southern part of Nigeria. In the northern part of Nigeria, the wet season can span for 3 months, can span for 4 months, can span for 2 months, or even just a single month of high rainfall, usually in July. So that's for the wet season. Then the other season in Nigeria is the dry season, and this season is usually lower in terms of humidity, and is actually dominated or controlled by a wind which we call the harmattan wind. And this wind is usually cold, it's usually dry, and it's usually dusty. And the dry season takes its course immediately after the rainy season. And so once we get into the month of November, the month of December, January, February, we begin to experience the dry season. So at this point of the year, it's usually cold, it's usually dry, and it's usually dusty, and it's backed by a trade wind called the harmattan wind. So let's talk about the temperature of Nigeria. Like I said previously, in Nigeria, the temperature is high owing to the fact that we are in a tropical climate. So it's always high all through the year. The minimum temperature is usually above 18 degrees Celsius, and the annual, temperature rate in the north is about 6 degrees Celsius. When you find the annual range of temperature, that is the difference between the highest and lowest temperature for the year in the northern part of Nigeria, will give you a value of about 6 degrees Celsius. Then for the southern part of Nigeria, temperature usually ranges from 20 degrees Celsius to 30, 2 degrees Celsius to 3 degrees Celsius, pardon. And in the highland areas, the temperature is usually cold and is usually lower, compared to the temperature we have in the lowland areas of Nigeria. Now, why is it so? It's so because the higher you go, the cooler it becomes. Now, owing to the fact that for lapse rates, the temperature of, a place reduces by, 6.5 degrees Celsius if you attain a height of 1,000 meters. So if I go up a height of 1,000 meters, the temperature will drop by 6.5 degrees Celsius. So if you get to places where you have highlands, that are usually higher above the lowland areas, and some highlands in Nigeria, they have a height of over 1,000 meters, and they experience a temperature lower than that of lowlands area. Now, example of places like this in Nigeria is the Jos Plateau, the Chapawadi, the Mambila Plateau, the Mandara Mountains, the Obudu Plateau, and the Western Highland area. So some of these places, the temperature is usually lower compared to the highland, compared to the northern part of Nigeria and the southern part of Nigeria, where you have highlands and lowlands. So this illustration shows the annual rainfall and also the annual temperature, that is common in Nigeria. So if you look at the left side of the screen, if you just look to your left, you see that the mean annual rainfall, diminishes as you project from the northern part of Nigeria down to the southern part of Nigeria. Here we have temperature falling from, falling from over 3,000 millimeter down to 468 millimeters of rainfall. That's annually. So if the northern part of Nigeria, which is the Sahel region here, you see that the temperature is between 468 to 700, the rainfall, is between 468 to 785 millimeter. Then as you go to the next part, which is the Sudan Savannah, you see that the rainfall, is from 785 to 1,220 millimeters. Then the Guinea Savannah, the rainfall is from 1,220 millimeters to 1,650 millimeters. Then as you get into the rainforest, is from 1,650 to 2,250. Then if you get into the lower part, the temperature falls below that. Then the rainfall falls below that. Then for temperature, we have that the temperature varies around Nigeria. Now, if you look at places here where you have the yellow coloring, you realize that these places with the yellow and the light brown coloring are the highland areas we have in Nigeria. Now, for this part, which is like the Jos Plateau and the eastern, highlands, or the northeast highlands, we have the temperature, ranging from 20.4 degrees Celsius down to 23 and 24.5 degrees Celsius. Then other places in Nigeria, will have an annual average, temperature of from 25.5 degrees Celsius down to 28.9 degrees Celsius. That's to say that in the highland areas in Nigeria, the temperature is usually the lowest compared to the lowlands and other places in Nigeria. So let's look at the distribution of temperature in Nigeria. Now, when we want to look at the distribution of temperature in Nigeria, we are going to consider what we call air masses. Air masses. Now, these air masses, they are actually what influence the seasons and the climate of Nigeria. So we have two major air masses in Nigeria. Now, the first one is called the tropical maritime air mass, or the southwest trade wind. So we call it the tropical maritime air mass, or the southwest trade wind. Then the second air mass we have in Nigeria is called the tropical continental air mass, or the northeast trade wind. The tropical continental air mass, or northeast trade wind. Now, let's look at the first one. The first one, which is the tropical maritime, or the southwest trade wind. Now, this wind is important because it is what brings about rainfall in Nigeria. Now, it does that because the wind is moist and it is coming from the Atlantic Ocean. So it comes from the Atlantic Ocean and it blows over the face of Nigeria. And when this wind is actually moving across the face of Nigeria, it accompanies rainfall. So the period of the year where the wind is dominant is the period where we have what? Rainfall the most. Then the second air mass is the tropical continental air mass, or the northwest trade wind. Now, this wind originates from the Sahara region of Africa, and the wind accompanies cold, accompanies lower or lesser humidity, and it brings dust, into Nigeria. So whenever we have this wind, dominant in Nigeria, we, then get into what? The Harmattan season. And it's usually dominant in the month of November and February, while the tropical maritime is usually dominant in the month of July and also in the month of September. So let's look at two conditions. Now, owing to the fact that we have the tropical maritime and the tropical continental, we have two conditions which we call the January condition and the July condition. Now, let's start with the January condition. Now, this January condition, relates to the tropical continental air mass, and it's found during the dry season. Now, during the dry season, the sun is in the southern hemisphere per se, and the tropical continental air mass will move towards the south. I say it again. During the dry season, the sun is found in the southern hemisphere. Now, the tropical continental air mass will blow towards the south. So what I'm saying in essence is that during the dry season, in the month of December, in the month of January, that's the season where people in the southern hemisphere, like people in the southern part of Africa, people in the southern part of Asia, people in the southern part of South America, they experience their summer, because the sun is actually at that point. So during that period, the tropical continental air mass coming from the Sahara region will blow towards that direction, and as a result of that, it's going to cut across all the surface of Nigeria. So at that point, it will shift towards the latitude 6 degrees north and towards latitude 4 degrees north. And when it happens, we experience the Harmattan season all over Nigeria. And the boundary between the tropical maritime air mass and the tropical continental air mass is called the ITCZ. ITCZ, the Intertropical Convergence Zone. Now, when the tropical continental air mass will shift towards the south, during the dry season, the ITCZ, which is the boundary, will also shift towards the south. And during that season, you see that the tropical maritime, or the wind from the Atlantic Ocean, will regress towards the what? Towards the Atlantic Ocean, or towards the coastal areas of Nigeria. So this is actually what happens in the January condition. Then For the July condition, you see that during the rainy season, this is where it comes into what play. Now, during the month of July, the sun will go to the northern hemisphere. And when the sun goes to the northern hemisphere, this time around, the tropical maritime air mass will move towards the northern part of Nigeria. And remember I told you that when this wind is moving, it brings rainfall. So in the month of July, as the tropical maritime head progresses towards the northern part of Nigeria, the boundary between the tropical maritime and the tropical continental, which is the ITCZ, will also move together with with the tropical maritime. So the ITCZ will shift towards the extreme north of Nigeria. And when the tropical maritime does this movement, it will bring about rainfall. And that's the time of the year where you see rainfall common in every part of Nigeria. So in the month of July, we begin to experience rainfall in the northern part of Nigeria as well as the southern part of Nigeria. Now, let's go to this diagram. Now, when you look at this diagram, you see that this diagram shows the January condition and the July condition. As you can see, if you look at the dry season, the tropical continental, which is from the Sahara region here, we have in the diagram, will progress towards the southern part of Nigeria. Then in the rainy season in the month of July, you have the tropical maritime progressing more, while the tropical continental will regress forward. So the ITCZ will shift to the northern part of Nigeria and West Africa, while the ITCZ will shift to the southern part of Nigeria and also the southern part of West Africa in the dry season. So this is it. Now let's talk about the rainfall in Nigeria. Now remember I told you that rainfall decreases as you move from the south to the north. Now for the southern part of Nigeria, which consists of the mangrove swamp and the freshwater swamp, you see that rainfall can span to over 2,500 millimeters. But as you get to the extreme north of Nigeria, you see that rainfall can go below 600 millimeters. And for the southern part of Nigeria, where you have a very high amount of rainfall, we usually have a double maxima of rainfall. Now, what I'm saying in essence is that for the southern part of Nigeria, rainfall is usually peak or maximum, in the month of July and also in the month of September, with a break in between July and September called the August break. So if you go to other parts of Nigeria, we can just experience a single maximum rainfall. But for the southern part of Nigeria, where the rainfall is usually high, we experience a double maxima of rainfall. Now let's look at this diagram. Now if you look at this diagram, it shows the level of rainfall in Nigeria. Now you have that the place with a dark blue color, which are places that are close to the Atlantic Ocean, here in Bayelsa and here in Cross River. You have that rainfall can span over 4,000 millimeters, because they are coastal areas and they can experience a high amount of rainfall. Then we also have the places in this mangrove swamp and freshwater swamp, they have a rainfall from 3,048 down to 2,540 millimeters. Then as you get to the extremes north of Nigeria, which is Sahel, as you can see, we have rainfall from 381 to 508 millimeters of rainfall. So it's approximately to 600 in terms of the nearest 600. So that's for the rainfall in Nigeria. Now let's talk about the climatic regions of Nigeria. The climate of Nigeria is actually divided into 6 regions or 6 categories. Now, the first category of climate in Nigeria is called the equatorial climate. And this climate is actually found in the coastland of southern Nigeria. Then the second one, immediately after the equatorial climate, is the sub-equatorial climate at the northern part of of the equatorial climate. Then as you progress further, towards the middle part of Nigeria, we have what we call the tropical hinterland. This climate is the climate that is found in the Guinea Savannah region of Nigeria. So if I go to places like Niger, if I go to places like Abuja, if I go to places like Adamawa and the rest, I will experience the tropical hinterland climate. Then if I progress towards the north of Nigeria, the north central region of Nigeria, we have the tropical continental climate, especially in the Sudan Savannah region. So the Sudan Savannah region is actually made up of of the tropical continental climate. Then the extreme north of Nigeria, where we have places like Borno, places like Dutse, we have the Sahel climate there. And amongst all the climates of Nigeria, this is the climate with the harsh condition, the harshest of all, that like the highest amount of temperature and a very low temperature range. Then we have the high plateau climate. Now this climate is actually found in places where you have highlands, places where you have plateau, places where you have the height of land getting to as high as 1,000 meters. So the first is equatorial climate, the second is the sub-equatorial climate, then we have the tropical hinterland, we have the tropical continental climate, we have the Sahel climate, and we have the high plateau climate. So these are the climatic zones or the climatic belts that we have in Nigeria. So let's talk about the vegetation of Nigeria. Now, when we talk about vegetation, we're actually talking about the plant species that can be found in a particular place, or the community of plants that we can find in a particular geographical location. So for Nigeria, the vegetation differs from one climate to the other. So let's look at this vegetation. Now, the first vegetation is called the mangrove forest. Now, or the saltwater forest. Now, this vegetation is actually found in the coastal regions of Nigeria in the south, and you have plants growing with aerated roots, and the plants thriving in places where you have the salt or estuaries, around such a location. Then when you move further inland, we have the freshwater swamp, and it's found in places in Rivers State, places in some places in northern part of Bayelsa, some places in Abia, and the rest. Then when you head over the freshwater swamp, we then have the tropical rainforest, and for that region, this is where you have presence of deciduous forest, evergreen plants. We have plants with layers and canopies, and also buttress roots. Then the other vegetational zone is the savanna zone. So under the savanna zone, we have the Guinea Savannah, which is the biggest vegetation in Nigeria. Then we have the Sudan Savannah, and we have the Sahel Savannah. So the Guinea Savannah, cuts across places in the middle belt and some places in the northeast and northwestern part of Nigeria. Then as you get to the Sudan Savannah, we have presence of tall grasses and also short trees. And then at the extreme north of Nigeria, we have the Sahel Savannah. Then for the montane vegetation, this is the type of vegetation that is found in the highland area. So the highland vegetation is actually regarded as the montane vegetation. Okay, so this is a diagram showing the vegetation of Nigeria. Like I said, we have the mangrove swamp, we have the freshwater swamp, we have the tropical rainforest, we have the Guinea Savannah, we have the Sudan Savannah, and we have the Sahel Savannah at the extreme north of Nigeria. So you see that as you progress, in the map, the heights we have from 0 to 10 here. Places that are labeled green are from 0 to 10, which are the lowland areas. Then the places with 2,000 to 2,419 meters, they are labeled orange, and is found in the eastern highlands and the north central highlands. Now, these places, they have the montane vegetation, while these lowlands, as you can see, we have the mangrove swamp, we have the rainforest vegetation, and we have the Guinea savanna. And lowlands in the Sahel region, they also have the Sahel vegetation and the Sudan vegetation right here. So let's look at the relationship between rainfall and vegetation in Nigeria. Now, high rainfall of about 2,000 millimeters will give rise to mangrove swamp forest in the south. So for us to have the mangrove swamp forest and as well the freshwater swamp, we need a very high temperature, rainfall of over 2,000 millimeters. Then also heavy rainfall and high temperature will also create, luxuriant forest in the south and also in the tropical rainforest region of Nigeria. Heavy rainfall also brings about the growth of tall trees in the south, and also heavy rainfall in the south does not support the growth of grasses. That's why we don't have a savanna in the southern part of Nigeria, because the amount of rainfall is usually high compared to the northern part of Nigeria. And also heavy rainfall in the southern part of Nigeria supports the growth of epiphytes, creepers, and climbers, and this is common in the tropical rainforest region of Nigeria. Now let's look at the relationship between climate and vegetation in the savanna belt. Now, for low rainfall in the savanna region, it will cause the growth of grasses, and also the high temperature we have there too can as well cause grasses to grow. So if you go to the northern part of Nigeria, the Sudan and Sahel to be precise, you're going to see series of grasses, and species of grasses, growing in such a particular climate. That's because they have a low rainfall and a high temperature. And also scanty rainfall in the north will give rise to scattered and short grasses. So in the Sahel region, the presence of scattered grasses, and scanty grass vegetation is due to the fact of what? Is due to the fact that we have low rainfall. And desert conditions, in the extreme north of Nigeria is caused by the presence of a low amount of rainfall. And the density of the savanna, reduces as you progress from the Guinea savanna down to the Sahel savanna. That's because as you progress, the height of the trees will reduce gradually, owing to the harshness of the climate as you progress to the north. And also low rainfall, gives rise to the formation of drought-resistant plants and also animals. So we have things like cactus, aloe vera, baobab, acacia, and all of these plants, thriving there, because these plants, they have the ability to retain water, for themselves. And also low rainfall gives rise to the growth of short deciduous trees in the northern part of Nigeria. Now, let's look at the contribution of forest vegetation to the economic development of Nigeria. Now, the forest, creates wildlife vegetation habitats for animals like the lions, the zebra, the giraffe, and the rest of them. And is also used for tourism. And also, the forest vegetation we have in Nigeria can provide us with food crops and also provide us with cash crops. And it also provides employment for hunters, employment for timbermen, employment for forest guards, because these people, they get their livelihood from this forest. And it provides raw materials for industrial use raw materials like cocoa, raw materials like rubber, palm oil, and the rest. And it also provides, wood that we can use for cooking, and wood that we can use for what? For construction. And these resources we get from the forest can be used for foreign exchange, because the cash crops that we have in this vegetation can be sold, and the money realized can be used to develop the country. So let's quickly look at the exam guide. So we're going to pick a question from the exam guide from 2015. Let's look at question number 4B and 4C. Let's look at question number 4C. Now it says, list 2 cash crops grown during the wet seasons in Nigeria. So a good example of that is the cocoa. We have the maize. These are popular cash crops that can be grown during the wet season in the southern part of Nigeria, and these cash crops can be used for the production of cereals, and also for the production of beverages that we consume in our various houses. Now the next one says, what are we should mention the characteristics of wet seasons in Nigeria. Now for the wet seasons in Nigeria, we usually have a high amount of rainfall. Rainfall can be from above 600 millimeters down to 3,000 millimeters, depending on the location. And also during the wet season, we usually have a high diurnal range of temperature. And the next one is that we have a high amount of temperature during the wet seasons in Nigeria, and as a result of that, we usually experience convectional type of rainfall. And during the wet seasons in Nigeria, in the southern part of Nigeria, we have double maxima, which is usually in the month of July and in the month of September. And in some places in Nigeria, during that period of wet season, we experience a maximum just in the month of July. So with this, we've come to the end of this class. Thank you for staying till this moment. See you.